So my name's Peter. I run the data journalism program and pilot at News Corp. And today I've got with me our latest interns. And on my left, I can see Dhivya, and who's the data scientist. And on my right is sayee, who's the intern data journalist. And both been with us for 6 or 7 weeks. Is it 7 weeks or 6 weeks? Really firing and shining and showing us their skills. They've been fantastic. So what's this all about, the data journalism program? So we've got this thing where we're a bit of a legacy business. Our journalists do things in traditional ways, but modern society is all data driven, and we don't have the skills in our industry to be able to interrogate data as if it was a person. Many of our journalists are averse to numbers. They like dealing with words. And as I probably mentioned to you guys earlier, is that, you know, one of the light bulb moment for me was when I went to GovHack and everyone there was analysing data and trying to tell stories. And there are all these data scientists who want to tell stories and don't know how. And we've got all these journalists who want to know how to do data and don't know how. So this RMIT pilot is about putting these two schools together, the schools of information and the schools of journalism, and saying, is there a hybrid here? Can we work together? And so that's what we've been doing. But probably what's been different about this cohort more than any other is coronavirus. So so how did that come about for you guys? Like, I know we started initially with it having an impact, but then things got dramatic pretty quickly. So what happened with you, sayee?
I think the first 2 weeks, Dhivya and I used to meet up at RMIT and work together with you. So you were always remote, but then at least Dhivya and I could talk immediately and then work on things together. And then I think it was from week 3 that we were all just forced into our houses. So I think working remotely has been stressful at times, because there's not much immediate feedback that we can give to one another because we're working so closely. Like, she can't proceed without the angles from the journalism side, and I can't proceed without data from her side. But I think we have learned to work, and thanks to Google Hangouts for not failing us, and at least until today, because today was just today's been tough.
Or is that just your internet connection? And what about you, Dhivya?
Yep, as I said, it was tough first few weeks, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and then we pretty much learned how to work together. We were just always on call and talking to each other and sending data and, sharing everything. So it was almost like sitting together.
Yeah, and you're sort of chatting away in Hangouts, and it's not a lot different really to working in Messenger or being friends in Messenger. But I think for you, Dhivya, the biggest difference about your experience is just how the news environment's very different to how you might prepare information for some other client or whatever. So how did you find that? A bit uncomfortable?
It wasn't uncomfortable. It was a completely new platform for me. But seeing you and sayee work, I really got to know a lot of stuff. Like today, sayee was telling me that you're not supposed to add any quotes without the person's full name, which I didn't know. I thought you just randomly add quotes, even if you don't have name, you can just say anonymous. So there are a lot of new things that I actually learned about journalism, and it's pretty interesting to know different story, the different person's perspective.
And I suppose the thing is, we did a lot. It jumps around a fair bit, doesn't it? Like, it wasn't like you just got one thing to do and follow that through to the end. We did quite a lot. So I want to start first of all by talking about the automated weather story. So so you've got a pack there, sayee, which you've presented several times now. Do you want to just run us through that one more time and tell us what happened, what you tried to achieve?
All right. So the project was to add new features to the existing automated weather story that's run on different uh, run for different mastheads. And what we took some time to analyze and go through different websites to see what information that they were publishing that we could use for our story. And we realized that there were a lot of numbers being used, but then not a lot of context being given behind them. So unless you already knew about what the UV index is or what the dew point is, that information is not going to make much sense to you on a daily basis. So we identified a few areas where we thought we could use or find a scale that would be easy to code as well to generate automated sentences on a regular basis. So some of the places that we saw was the dew point, UV index, the wind speeds, even you can customize the chance of rain and even give different advice like take your jacket or carry your umbrella. So it can be customized or contextualized pretty easily. Um, this was the first prototype that we did. This was with the dew point. The chart on the right is from the Bureau of Meteorology. So they've given these scales of dew point and they've given us how it's going to feel. So what we did was we made them into different sentences that the code can then give as an output. So so this was like the sample output that we did with our initial prototype. And so for example, if the dew point was say 3 degrees, then it would be B sample. We didn't have, on that day, we didn't have a postcode that was 5 degrees or less. So we just had to come up with our own. So these are just some of the outputs that the initial prototype produced. We also found scales for UV index, visibility scale. So all of these can be like coded in the same way to make like future modifications. We found another scale for wind. Yes, so this one was the output that was being produced in the test environment. So the sentences were slightly modified to make it easier for the code to produce, but it pretty much has the same essence of making sentences with that fit into a scale of dew point. And using the scales that we have identified, we could customize this for different aspects of the weather, and it pretty much will follow the same process with the features, and it's just a matter of fitting them into a scale and then putting them up into the code.
Excellent. So Dhivya, you had to do the prototype coding. So that was, you did that in Python?
Yeah.
It wasn't a very difficult job though, that part, was it?
It was very easy.
It was very easy, that's right. But the more difficult things come a bit later. Look, that was a fantastic exercise and a good easy way in to the data journalism piece, and also it's a very important part of how we do it, which is customized content for personalized content, basically, using programmatic sort of methods of looking at data and telling stories. So you did a really good job on that. Then I suppose talking about COVID now, we did have some little side things going on, side projects, and we decided to do a bit of modelling. And this is where Dhivya had a go. So what did you do, Dhivya?
So I took some data from the John Hopkins website, and that data was from 22nd of January to the 6th to the 10th of March. So that was very less data that we had at that time when I first built the time series model, and that data was of confirmed cases for New South Wales. And I'm going to show you the forecasting model that we came up with. So in the when I first tried to make a forecasting model, it was all right, but due to the very insufficient data, this was the gap that I found. So the red line that you see is the actual count that I fit into this model after I got all the latest counts. And the green line that we see was what the model predicted. So there's a huge gap.
So
And
it wasn't picking up on the exponential nature of it.
yeah, so the accuracy was only 54%.
Yeah.
But when I did the same second time with data from 22nd January to 6th of April, it was better with an accuracy of 87%. And if you see, there's not much of a gap, at least it's less. So the red line is what the model predicted, and the blue one is what is the actual count.
Yeah. So the prediction was pretty right, except it didn't take into account the distancing.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So government was doing very well at that time, so we didn't have much count.
No. So it's always going to lag, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unless it's got enough information on the short curve, it's going to lag, and then it'll pick up. But in those early days of when something happens, it's going to be very hard for algorithmic things to detect what's going on.
True, yeah.
That's really good, and we were incredibly impressed by that. But at the same time, we couldn't do much with it because of that problem, and you can end up putting out a forecast and make people very scared. And in fact, it hasn't happened that way. It's been interesting to see how different it was from the model, the results so far in Australia. So that's been a good exercise all around, I think. And then the main piece that you guys have been working on since those first maybe 2 or 3 weeks has been around fuel prices. And so this was a big exercise, probably in 2 parts really. One is to where do you get the information from and how do you get it? And that was Dhivya's job. And then it was how do we tell a story from it? So Dhivya, can you talk to me first of all about what you did to get the information?
So when you told that New South Wales actually has an application which gives all the latest prices for fuel, I went and checked if there are any historical data, and there was an archive where I could find all the months data from 2016 to present, that is till March. So we took 3 months of data, that is from January to March, and we had to do a lot of cleaning to make sure we have consistent data, because most of the dates were missing for every station almost, because the prices weren't being updated every day. So we had to do pivot tables, and we had to clean, and then every day that we did analysis, we found some or the other error, and we had to again start everything from start. So that really took a lot of time, but we learned a lot in that process. So it was a teamwork. Sai helped a lot when it came to data cleaning. In fact, she learned, I guess we did most of the data analysis together. So it was fun.
And like when you read the books on it or you know anything about work with data, you know that maybe 60% of the job is actually cleaning the data. It's just, depending on the source, but it can be very time consuming. And especially you think you've done it and then you're doing stuff and then something else emerges and then you've got to go back and do it again. So yeah, I understand that. So you've learned a lot about APIs and cleaning, and I think it's been a very fast learning process.
Yeah, true.
It's like you're on steroids doing this, especially because there's deadline pressures and, we can't wait 3 months for it. We need it kind of now. So you did, and then you did some analysis of that. So how did you do that?
So there were many things for us to analyze, and based on our discussions, I thought let's just maybe plot a time series graph of all the prices.
Would you want to show us some of the examples of what you've been doing?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. So after coming up with a lot of graphs, this was something that we felt was well explainable. I mean, it has a lot to tell about. So this is a time series line graph that I've did from for the prices of regional versus the metropolitan New South Wales, and the data is from January 1st to March 31st. And based on this data, the red lines, red line represents the metro prices, and the blue line represents the regional prices. And we could say that are very sticky, and they don't really. Most of the stations don't prefer to change prices quickly compared to the metro prices. And this is what we based our complete analysis on.
So there's a lot of work in the back end of that to get to this simplified chart, right?
Yeah.
So there's all these, like, how many petrol stations did we do?
I guess
Just
it
for
must be
just for
250.
2021 alone, it was 1,200 petrol stations.
Yeah, 1,200 petrol stations. And then you had to find a price for each location and average them up and all that sort of analysis in order to get a line.
Yeah. Yeah.
And including the dealing with those outliers. And even so, let's talk about one of those outliers. Let's talk about, we'll come back to this, but we'll talk about the most expensive petrol station in New South Wales. And I think your question to me, Dhivya, was, is this right? Because he didn't update his petrol prices very often, did they?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so what did we do, sayee?
We just rang them up.
We rang them up and we said, what did we say? Tell me about the conversation.
So I just called them up. I really didn't have time to introduce myself, or I just said, hey, I just noticed the price on fuel check is 171.9. Just wanted to check if it's accurate. They said, yeah, it is. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, and so I suppose that goes to the heart of the data journalism teamwork thing. Is I'm pretty sure a data scientist wouldn't do that. I'm pretty sure that they would just work through the numbers and do their charts, and they'd remove some outliers because they don't like the look of them. Gone. But they wouldn't get on the phone and find out whether they're real or not.
True.
True, right? So that's the beauty of this system of what we do, is we look at something like that and then we say, well, actually, let's go and find out. So how else did you see qualify in what you found out? Like, we didn't just write stories and publish them without getting other inputs. So what did you do?
So when we started off the fuel story, it was more of analyzing it by postcode for the past 3 months. And I think we found out that it was just a volume of data that we couldn't necessarily find a trend from. So we started calling up professors who have dealt with Australian fuel industry. And one of the first persons I spoke to, he told us that the fuel trend in New South Wales doesn't have a set duration. So he said, you could be looking at 3 months, but the 3 months could have been part of a 6-month cycle. So he said, unless you're going to scale back to at least a year or so, postcodes may not be the right angle to look at it. And then when we got when we got requested to help out on the metro prices story, we realized that maybe separating them by regional and metro could be an easier way to approach the story and find sense from the 150,000 data points that we had from 3 months. And looking at that, we then went, we also spoke, and then we talked when we started looking at metro and regional, we were looking at angles like, how do we find if there's more competition? How do we find if someone's just ripping off the customers. And then so we found another paper that was done by this professor from University of Swinburne, and we spoke to him, and he gave us a lot of inputs as well about the competition, about how prices generally moves up or down in regional areas. So I think speaking to them gave us a lot more direction to see how we could analyze the data.
What's interesting about this, of course, is, and you're seeing this too, Dhivya, is you can have a lot of information that never sees its way into the story. That it's really just informing the investigation and the journalist about, yes, so they understand it. And just like your code, no one really sees all the cleaning that went into it. And no one sees all the back end stuff that goes into producing, a chart. And the same is very similar for a reporter who ends up writing a story of 300 words or something, having spoken to multiple people, of which only some of them are going to be mentioned in the story. Yeah. So it's interesting to see that, isn't it? Okay, so let's go back to Dhivya and just show me some more of your insights if you've got any there.
So this is what we did when we were experimenting before we started comparison between the regional and metro prices. So we did a monthly analysis of February's data, and we came up with this swarm plot based on postcodes. So this is when our actual analysis started. We started asking a few questions, and that led to the final result. So
it still looks very cool.
Yeah, it does look pretty.
And you can see the range. So basically, what we're looking at there is 4 weeks by postcode, and you can see the distribution between those weeks. The week 2 looks interesting in that there's a cluster at the top, and it's still full depth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you look at week 3 or week 4 is a really contracted bunch, but week 2 is fully extended. So there's lots happening in there, and you're right, you can't really make sense of it, but you know there's something happening in there. Yeah. Okay, you got something else?
This was something that I was just playing with the data, and I got this. So I plotted this with the regional prices that I got from for all the 3 months based on the fuel type. For all the
looking at the various fuel types, and these are LGAs. So how did you come up with those LGAs? Because
so the the mapping data that you gave helped a lot. So using VLOOKUP, we just I know we could have done that in Python as well, but we thought let's just do it in VLOOKUP. So we did all the mapping for the data, and then but yeah, initial had to be done in Python because all the postcodes were given in one cell, and then the LGA's name was given. So we had to first convert it to a neat form, and then make sure that each row of the data would have an LGA linked to it, so that we have a proper visualization to show. So that's how we ended up with all these LGAs for each of the data point.
Very cool. It's well done. There's a lot of work in that.
Yeah, and this one feels better than the postcodes because this is lesser than the number of postcodes we've got. So yeah, it's just a compressed version.
Yeah, I suppose what we can see from it is that and we kind of know this, is that the fuel type that has the least competition in it is diesel. That just has the range is so short.
There is one green dot.
There's one dot at the top there. So what's that one, the most expensive? Central Darling, well, we know that. Which is, of course, the Outback. So we can expect that. And look at the out there as well.
Yeah.
But what's that? Obviously there's an outlier there's a couple of wrong ones at the bottom there that are 0. Probably they don't have that fuel type. That'd be right. But what's that bottom blue one on LPG?
LPG. Albury.
Albury. Yeah. Okay.
21 years.
It's really cool. Is there anything else you want to show me?
I guess that's all I've uploaded.
What
yeah. So there was the bar graph, right?
Yeah.
So this is where you can see the comparison of the regional prices versus the metropolitan prices. So for all the fuel types, you can see that there's always a gap between the average price of the regional areas and average price provided by the metropolitan areas of New South Wales.
So I think what you've done here is really good work because, and sayee can comment on this, because I think you were talking to that professor and there's not a lot of work being done on differentiating regionals from metropolitan areas. Is that right?
Yeah.
True, yeah.
So what he said was the ACCC aren't really able to focus on or find price gouging. So he said it doesn't make much sense to keep looking at markets where there's a lot of competition because the prices are relatively normalized. But he said to look at regional areas, looking at competition, looking at distance from metropolitan areas are some of the ways that some of the directions that could be used to analyze or control the prices in those places.
Yeah, really good. Really good. I think what we might do with this is, I don't think this story ends here when you guys finish today. I think there's a need to hand over to another team who can take it further, maybe. So, because I think there's this whole story about how it's costlier to live in country areas, even though they produce basically a lot of the wealth of the nation. It's not made easy for them, and so there's something there in this about fuel, about a whole bunch of other prices, and imports, and how city people won't pay the value of the goods produced in Australia, so they get them from overseas. And I think that's going to be very topical now post-COVID.
Yeah.
And I think we're really well placed to understand that based on this kind of stuff. So it's really good work. And I thought, given the short time frame, like 6 weeks, the amount of work you guys have covered in that period, basically 2 days a week, is just phenomenal. I know you've done extra work. I know that. It shows. So a really good effort. Well done.
Thank you.
And I'm going to miss you. You've been fantastic.
You were very supportive and you were always there. So
yeah, no, it's been good fun.
Thank you.
I think by the end of it, we were able to, even when we were doing our work, we were like, what would Peter ask if we did this? And then we tried to answer that question. And then we were like, we want to ask that. And then we answered that question.
Oh, because that's what. Because one of the things about all this is trying to find the hook, isn't it? Like, is and even like in that story we've just done. And so I haven't mentioned, but of course your weather story is being produced into UAT, so it's in testing at the moment, which you've seen today. You've already had a story published on Sydney petrol prices in the Daily Telegraph. That's pretty exciting. And the regional version, which we're doing now, will be going up this afternoon. So you're published data journalists. So we should mention that. Anyway, I think that we might say call that a day. What else was I going to say? You asked me before, Dhivya, about documents handing over, and I probably thought, I just want the stories, but actually I don't. Some of that is notebooks that you've got, or some of that data that you've got might be useful when we do a handover.
Yeah.
So I think you've done that work, and it'd be a shame for it to be lost. So we might just hook up, get Mark to get on a phone call with you and see what are the stuff that you've done that we can take into our team.
Okay.
For instance, the postcode LGA mapping of the data is interesting. That's something that we can find a use for.
Yeah.
Okay, well done.